So today we'll be looking at the sixth commandment, which goes thus: "Thou shalt not commit adultery," or simply put, "do not commit adultery." I think it's a very contemporary issue, well, especially in these days in the 21st century, when people talk about well being liberated, the liberation of sex. And many times, of course, many people, especially when speaking with young people, at times there's this of course tension, this energy, and it becomes question they ask regarding this virtue, this commandment, which has to do with the virtue of chastity, as we will see, as well is how far. I mean, in a relationship, how far can I go? In a marriage, what can I do? What can't I do? What does the church have to say about sexuality, about pornography, about masturbation, about immature fertilization? And of course, there are many issues that naturally fall under this commandment, as we will see, many contemporary issues. But I'll just start off by saying, well, that historically there's been two great tendencies regarding explanation of sexuality, human sexuality and love, which are I would say the two pillars in which we start this class. One extreme is to say, well, that to the shall we call it the puritanic extreme, which goes thus: well, anything about sex and about love, don't talk about it. It's dirty. It's a kind of taboo, and so that people should maintain the status quo without asking questions because it's a taboo topic. And if you say in a sense, in many societies that had held for many years and for many centuries until more or less maybe in a more blatant way because that happened also in the past. And that's the other extreme, which is to say, look, why are you making this a taboo? Let us talk about it. Let us liberate sex from the clutches of those who feel that is a bad thing. And because that first extreme makes it look as if it's a bad thing not to be talked about. Something dirty, even when you speak about it, you're dirtying one's mouth. And so this other extreme now says, look, let's talk about it. But they now go all the way to say, well, let's talk about it, and then everything there becomes commonplace. And typically, when the church addresses this issue, it's good to understand because I think many times people mistake that the fact that the church neither proposes the puritanic view nor the other view. That there are some things that each of these extremes say that are true, which we will see as we get along. So having said that, it's just a way of whetting one's appetite. What does the church really say about this? Not puritanic, and neither is it giving weight to free license. The first thing I would like us to address, there are three things to address. First of all, before we go into the commandment itself, the details of the commandment. First of all, that men and women are different. Secondly, what sex is, properly speaking, and then thirdly, what love is. Once you have those three pillars, it's now easier to, well, it makes every other thing, that all the consequences that will draw from these three ideas will make sense. First off, well, that men and women are different is something that, for the catechism would remind us, and it's something that we sense too, that the difference between a man and a woman is not just physical. But maybe initially people will say, well, they are different because because of their physical differences. Man has breast, the figure, the number of bones that they have, that bones on the ribs that are different, etc., etc. But the sexual organs that are different. But it goes beyond that. It's also in addition that the way a man thinks, on average, you got to the way the average man thinks and the way the average woman thinks is different. The things that attract them are different. Men are more prone, and that has been, the neurologists have shown that by observing the brain. Now, women are very good at multitasking, better at multitasking than men. They can do several things at the same time. And they, thankfully, they do it well than men. Men are more prone to focus on things that have to do with action, and that's why they like football a lot. women are more interested in people, and they have a greater tendency towards empathy. That also, even down to the way they love. Uh, that I remember once reading a novel, and the person was saying at times that if you ask a man why he loves something, he will start giving you statistical reasons. So this and that, or this person. But if you ask a woman why she loves, that she will give reasons, but the reasons that a man cannot really fully understand. At times, I think amongst men they notice it when they say, "Well, why does this woman love this guy so much?" I don't understand what the guy is doing. Well, because the way she loves, the way she understands is different. And the women also, for example, when they are under stress, they they want to talk. They want to talk, they want to let it out, they want to be understood. Not so much to find a solution, but well, just to let it out. That's why at times they can be several of them are talking to each other and they all understand what they're saying, what empathy. Whereas the man may misunderstand it as saying that well, maybe she's complaining. I could go on, but I just want to highlight a few. And but that difference that is not just physical, but that goes down to it goes is a difference that also goes down to the soul. Yeah, and so I want to say that well that the way a man loves and the way a woman loves are not the same. And not just the way they love for the opposite sex, but also the way they love God, the way they pray, not the same. And the difference between the man and the woman is also, also something that is part of their nature ordained by God. And but that difference also leads to a certain complementarity. What do I mean by that? That the man complements the woman complements the man, and it's a complementarity that has been willed by God on the one hand. Secondly, that difference also leads to a certain mutual attraction that's ordained to love, to a love and a life-giving institution called marriage. At times I tell people that, well, see, many times they don't agree initially, but from my own little experience, people over time say, well, after what you said was true. That when a young boy hangs out with a girl every day, uh, whether over time he begins to have feelings for that girl. And the same happens to the boy and to the girl. When she spends a lot of time with a particular boy, she whether because they attract, that's what the opposite sex attract. And again, for this reason, God has ordained it so. The girl can hang out with her best friend that she has known from when she was young, another girl too, but she does not feel you could say that sexual attraction in the same way that you feel for a boy that maybe she has met um, over 6 months or over 3 months. Yeah. And that God has placed that mutual attraction into lead, or you say to lead one, the man and the woman into that institution called marriage, that they get married. The second pillar we move to now is what is sex for? Or why you may be wondering why I jumped into this. I also wanted to clarify this second idea, the second pillar. So I first said the complementarity between man and woman, male and female. Um, now regarding sex, uh, many times people talk about sex, and as at the beginning we mentioned, well, the liberation of sex, but very few people ask. They talk about how, uh, but not about what sex is for. Talk about how and why, but what is it for? Of course, a first cursory glance, if you ask, now we looking at it reasonably and coldly and with our reason, that what happens when people have sex? Uh, Two things happen. Two uh, basic things. One is that maybe not so basic, but a person who was going to analyze it wholly would say, well, when people have sex, that is a means for producing children. The second, uh, what for? Sex was, we say one, sex is for begetting children. The second thing we could say is that well, sex is for expressing love, the love between a man and a woman. And on that love, we could also say self-giving. And that people, it doesn't mean that every time people have sex, they have exactly these two things in mind. But looking at it coldly, that those are the two things. They may have one of them in mind. They may have both in mind. But uh, but you see the natural function of sex in all situations, in all cultures, is that the functionality is to beget children, is the means of ordinarily begetting children and of expressing love. And these two things, they are again ordained by God, and there are things that are good. Uh, of course, that begetting children, sorry, that begetting children, you could say that sex is for the generation of life, and then sex also, that expression of love leads to that unity between the two people who are having sex. These two things I've just mentioned are the two elements that the church speaks about when it says that well that the marriage, as we see, the unitive and the procreative aspects of sex. And so it makes sense that, of course, that sexual union is ordered towards the conjugal love, conjugal meaning marital love of a man and a woman. Uh, why? Because in the first place, um, you can beget children out of wedlock. Fine. If you beget children a one night stand, sorry to be so blunt, but that of course the best, the most adequate place to beget children is because not just enough humans are different from animals. That we get children, but those children have to be brought up, and the best place they can be brought up is in a family where they have a father and a mother. Not that children are not like some animals that well, the sea turtle will lay an egg, and then when the egg hatches, the turtle will find its way and try to survive. That the child is born, and then of course the child needs support, and of course the best support, the best place where it can find love and understanding and acceptance, and it can be nurtured is in a family. Uh, not a broken family now, not a non-existent family, but a normal family, which it has a father and a mother. And so you say that sex, so that marriage ensures this first element, the begetting of children, so the begetting and the bringing up of children. And also in marriage, does one really, only within marriage, does one really carry out the conjugal act or the marital act expressing love. Uh, and so the spouses union, uh, that's when in marriage achieves the twofold end of marriage, which is to beget children and to express love. Some people may disagree and say, well, what if you just want to have sex for the pleasure? But that is, I think, also the point because sometimes sex is not just about pleasure. Sometimes people can have sex and one of the parties is not enjoying anything. Not enjoying anything. So when we say that if one says what sex is for pleasure, they're missing the point that sex always either have you getting of children ordinarily or expressing love. And there may be pleasure, of course, most times there is pleasure, but then again there are cases when there is no pleasure. Because when uh, the person, one of the spouses is older, one of them is not in the mood, the things that we'll see as we go on in this class. But rather, it's not as if we're not denying that there's pleasure, because we know that that would be to deny the truth. But to say that that pleasure, rather, which is so exalted, is actually an element that God has added, like an incentive, in order to for the spouses to carry out the conjugal act, to, to love each other. It's like saying, and that pleasure is akin to the pleasure we get from eating. You eat a good meal, you enjoy the food. But if you ask the person, why do you eat the food? Well, the person could answer, well, I eat the food because it tastes good. But ultimately, eating also is so that I stay alive, because if I don't eat, I will die of hunger. I will not nourish myself. So that pleasure food, just like in sex, is an add-in, very exalted, very nice, but in order to achieve the ends of that begetting of life and expressing love. If a person focuses on just the pleasure and just that last bit of that there's this quote somebody once said that sex uh, plays with man. The man thinks he's playing with sex, but sex plays with man. And the person just focuses on the pleasure. It's like the person that just eats just for the fun of eating. And of course, what happens? The sense of food. He loses that sense of food. He loses that sense of food. He doesn't maybe nourish himself. And eating now becomes something now degrading. It becomes like those people of old who used to they would eat and vomit. I asked them, why are you eating? No, I'm eating not to nourish myself, but in order to vomit. So that when the person just focuses on pleasure, which is something very nice, yeah, and something very exalted, but the fear there is that at the end, sex ends up playing with man and not man with sex. Now we go to the third element, which I said is love. I already announced that love. That love is a term that many people use in different ways. They say, I love football. I love Coca-Cola. I love my parents. They have used that the word love, three different elements, but they don't three different say predicates, but they don't mean the same thing. In some cases, maybe I love this song, maybe just a feeling. That love is not just a feeling, neither is it just lusting for something or someone. And that love is an act of the will that implies certain self-giving. Because in the case of maybe the Coca-Cola, you will say, well, I will give my life for Coca-Cola that I love. So, wow, yeah, fantastic that you give your life for Coca-Cola. I don't know how many people that will do that for the drink of Coca-Cola. Maybe some people will, but unfortunately, even if you do, Coca-Cola will not respond in kind because it doesn't have the capacity to love in return. That I think it's important that we make that distinction as we see in this next slide between the different types of love when people refer to love. I came up with this triangle I saw in a book. I felt it's very interesting to analyze, and I like the analysis that I got from it. When they speak about the four types of love, at the top of the triangle we have eros. The second we have affection, eros, erotic love. Then affection, friendship, love of friendship, and then charity, God's love. As you go up, as you go from the base of the triangle upwards, on the right, you see an increase in physical experience. As you go from top down, from eros towards charity, there's an increase in authenticity. That erotic love can have a lot of physical experience, but doesn't mean that it's authentic. Uh, but it's not as authentic as affection, or it's as authentic as friendship. And of course, charity is more authentic than friendship. And then we're looking at it the other way, of course, that charity has less physical experience than maybe that love of friendship or affection that one shows towards another or eros. What does that have to do? And why this triangle? Uh, for three reasons. First of all, that the lower bases in the pyramid elevates the higher one. When we talk about these different kinds of love, what do I mean by that? That when there's, for example, I'll use the friendship and affection. That when I receive a sign of affection from somebody, well, it's very nice. I'm happy. Maybe before going into an exam, somebody calls me and embraces me. Someone I don't know and says good luck. Well, I feel happy. Yes, someone showed me affection. But if it's a friend that calls me and embraces me, does the same gesture and says good luck, it has elevated that affective act. For me, uh, the same way to so I would say between affection and friendship. Same way too, of course, if if it's done for charity's sake, maybe someone that I know, maybe now, maybe another example, the an erotic act, let's say an embrace or a kiss between a husband and a wife now, it has a greater value than it's elevated, more elevated than it is someone that, well, that I don't know or I know. Maybe the person may be a friend, so of course that elevates it a bit more. It's more closer to the person. So that's what I mean by, but the lower basis elevate the higher one. Okay? But don't just that they elevate it, they also regulate the higher one. So okay, what I already mentioned, 2A, signs of affection have greater value from friends. 2B, because signs of friendship have greater value if based on charity. So that at times a friend, uh, because a friend can say yes, yes, yes to everything you say, but sometimes that friend he says, well, for charity's sake, I have to help this my friend to stop this or to start doing this, and maybe I go and drag him. So that sign of friendship has a greater value because this person is going against his own will or inclination, eh, not just out of friendship, but out of charity. So that's why I mean that it regulates because a person can decide to stay at friendship level, to say in quotes, friendship level, and then just go along with everything I say or do. Uh, and then what the person within will not always be virtuous because the person is not being sincere to me. Now, thirdly, the eros. I hope I'm not boring people with this long explanation, but I think it's something good to keep in mind when we talk about love. The eros standing alone, that's say sexual encounter between two people in which there's no affection, there's no friendship, there's no charity. A person that maybe, for example, a person who meets a prostitute along the road and sleeps with the prostitute, you call it the eros standing alone. It's the hookup culture. And then fourthly, the hookup culture in which people at times just meet and then the sex is empty, the sexual act is emptied of its meaning. That's what they call the hookup culture. And then fourthly, um, 2D, Kairos ultimately based on charity is a good marriage. And that good marriage, of course, that the erotic act is regulated by charity. For example, that the man one day comes home in a good marriage and he asks his wife for his conjugal rights. And the wife doesn't feel like, but because she loves him, uh, she overcomes maybe her a bit, say, resistance and accedes to his request. That's how charity regulates the erotica. On the contrary, it may happen that maybe the woman feels like, but the man has a splitting headache, and she asks for conjugal rights, and the man says, I have a headache, I don't know. And she because she feels compassion for him for charity's sake, she does not insist on her rights. And so that way, what happens is that charity regulates uh, the signs of affection, the signs of friendship, the erotic sign. And so that at the end, of course, that what is more important, that the love, that's number three, the love that is the base of the relationship determines how it is lived. It's not about having one's pleasures or not, but that love, charity regulates the seeking of pleasure or the non-seeking of pleasure, the exposing of oneself or not exposing of oneself. Uh, it's important that I think we bring that into mind because it's seeking the pleasure for pleasure's sake is when, of course, one loses the virtue. But for integrating it within charity, that charity now helps one to see when, because that attraction, when and how to regulate. Having said that, can now introduce what the virtue of chastity is, which in a sense will be defined implicitly. The catechism, because we already said this, we already said that Sexuality affects all aspects of the human person, in the unity of his body and soul. And so that sexuality affects the way we love, the affective capacity to love, to procreate, and in a more general way, the aptitude for forming bonds of communion with others. So, but it's also true that because of original sin, that sexual capacity tends to fall prey to one's selfishness. That one thinks about oneself, one's pleasure. And so that this disorder has to be remedied by the virtue of chastity, by making the effort to live a chaste life. So what is chastity? The Catechism defines it, looking at all we've seen so far, so that we say that regulation, but it defines that the successful integration of sexuality within the person and thus the inner unity of man in his bodily and spiritual being. So is that successful integration of one sexuality, or you say regulation of that sexuality within knowing oneself, but within that ambit, that context of charity, not just eros on its own or affection on its own, eh, but or friendship on its own. And so even maybe, sorry, so and it forms part of that virtue of temperance. So maybe going back to one of the questions I asked at the beginning of the class, I said, I think young people ask me, they ask me, well, how far can I go? Can I show this person affection? But affection is based on friendship. It should be based on friendship and ultimately based on charity. At times I answered and I said, well, that of course, there are many signs of affection that people who are engaged can show certain signs of affection that are within that context of friendship, but not within the context of marriage. Maybe a chaste embrace, perhaps. But I tell them, see, and at times I remember in school once, young girls asked me in secondary school, well, can we? Is it bad to if a boy kisses if I kiss a boy? And I said, well, does your brother kiss you? And they say yes, but my brother does not count. I said, well, your brother can show you, and you can kiss your junior brother, immediate other brother, as a sign of affection, and it's based on you say that friendship between siblings, so it's a charity. But when it happens outside that, then between people who you know say, okay, this sign of affection is it based on friendship, and ultimately was it based on charity? Charity, knowing that this person has not given himself or herself fully to me in marriage. And then, if not, then it's a lie. So, so having that in mind, that what is chastity? The successful integration of sexuality within the person, and thus the inner unity of man in his body and spiritual being. So it's part of the virtue of temperance. And so maybe again going back to what we started with, that the church does not say Puritanism for Puritanism's sake. Don't talk about this issue. Neither does it say, look, we have liberated sex. But rather it says that look at like the people who have been quote liberated sex, they realize that sex is a very good thing. That's a very, or not just a good thing, but a very holy thing that God has given. But precisely because it is very elevated and very holy, that it needs to be put within its context, not just thrown outside without any context. Chastity is a Christian virtue. Sorry for the double is at the heading. And so, for a new motive and with the help of God's grace, we try to live that virtue of chastity as a way of regulating um, that expressions of love and the way one loves the other. Because without living chastity, it's difficult to live charity. If one doesn't live a chaste life, it's difficult to regulate how one loves the others. And the dignity of the human body demands that we live chastity. The dignity of my own body and the dignity of the others. As St. Paul would say, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, which you have from God? You are not your own. Now, having said that, what we're going to look at next, the second half of this class, basically is chastity in marriage, chastity, single or celibate life, and then sins against chastity. But first of all, what we're going to see now, we'll see a short video that introduces us to that chastity in marriage.
What does the church teach about sexual morality? From a basic biological perspective, sex is the act of procreation. As a genuine human act, sex should also be an expression of a loving gift of self. This much was established in the previous episode. Now, for sex to be an actual expression of that gift of self, a few things must be taken into consideration. A gift has two essential characteristics. A gift is forever, and a gift is given completely. When I ignore these characteristics of a gift in human sexuality, I destroy the actual meaning of the sexual act as an expression of self-giving. That means, first of all, sex cannot be a genuine expression of self-giving if I do not intend to stay together with the other person. If there is some expiration date on our relationship, a one-night stand, an affair, a temporary relationship, or a let's just give it a try kind of thing destroys the meaning of sex as an expression of self-giving. Sex has its proper place in a relationship where we take this giving yourself forever seriously and really mean it. In what type of relationship is this the case? Well, in marriage, because when I get married, I solemnly promise before God and the people that I will love, honor, and cherish the other all the days of my life. I make a firm commitment that I want to give myself forever, and that is why sex belongs properly in marriage. Second, a gift is given completely. For sex, this means I have to give myself as I am, as a man or woman with my masculinity or femininity. This includes my fertility, which is part of me as a biological being. Procreation is not the only meaning of human sexuality, but it is there in the very nature of the sexual act. And if I purposefully destroy my fertility, the sexual act can no longer be an expression of giving myself completely. This is the reason why the church rejects artificial contraception. Artificial contraceptives destroy the meaning of the sexual act as a true gift of self, and therefore sex would no longer be an authentic expression of giving yourself. Artificial contraception is consequently ruled out by the church. Now, are there other methods of family planning? There are different, in fact also modern, methods of natural family planning. These methods seek to determine a woman's fertile and infertile days. Should the love of the spouse or the children provide serious grounds for avoiding the conception of another child, the use of natural family planning is morally acceptable. The difference between natural family planning and artificial contraception lies in the fact that in using natural family planning, human fertility and the wholeness of the human person are not destroyed, but rather respected as they are. Okay, so much for that subject. Now, there are, of course, other topics connected to sexuality. But if we have understood the basic argument of the nature of sex as both a biological and a human act, then we will also understand the Church's teaching on masturbation, pornography, and homosexual acts. The Church weighs all of these things in light of the true meaning of the sexual act. Human sexuality is not simply about quieting some urge or satisfying a drive, but rather this act has a human and personal dimension. Sex is meant to express one's gift of self. Whenever this is ignored, we actually destroy love and ultimately the dignity of the human person.
So having said that, we can see that as well, in summary, that is when he says that sex expresses that gift of self, that one gives oneself to the other. And those two elements that he mentioned, the two elements of a gift that is forever and not just for some time or not until, well, until the one is tired, and is also complete, that one does not give a partial gift that gives either a gift all, because it's only a human being that can ask for all or nothing. And that I give all of myself to the person gives all of himself to the spouse, or nothing at all. There's no room for half measures. So now, because it's forever, because anyway, be forever matrimony, uh, and that's why I say that marriage is forever now, till death do them part, which symbolizes that total personal donation. And then giving oneself completely means includes giving one's fertility. Not the case to say, well, I want to give myself to you, but with condition, or I want to give myself partially to you. And that's why, as we've seen in the video, it goes against the use of contraception in marriage. So chastity in marriage, properly speaking, already seen earlier on that the sexual union is ordered to the conjugal love of man and woman, and that is only sex expresses that I give myself to you, that the man says to the woman the day they got married. And when they got married, the person also said that I do, and the man said I do, the woman said I do. It's a way of saying, well, I give myself to you fully. Uh, and they say it in the church, at the beginning of the marriage ceremony, and then they express it. They express that I give myself to you in the when they uh, consummate that marriage in the sexual act. They also say it, of course, each time that they come together. And that's why when two people express with their bodies what they did not say with their mouth earlier on, then what are they doing? They are lying with their body. They are basically lying with their body. And that's why the sexual act, the conjugal act only makes sense, only has true meaning within marriage. In other cases, they will be lying with their bodies. And that spousal union uh, achieve the twofold end of marriage, which we've already said earlier on: unity and then that unity of fidelity, and then the transmission of life, fecundity. And so, what does chastity in marriage lead us to know? Well, first of all, that a couple shouldn't be afraid to have large families, because large families with that sense of responsibility, and not just to have children for having children's sake, but to have children that they can take care of, but not to be afraid of having children, which is, I mean, we one extreme to say, well, I want to be responsible, but I don't want to have too many children. We don't be afraid to have children. It's a sign, but children that one can take care of, because they're a sign of God's blessing and the parents' generosity. A child is a gift. Why do I say that? It's not something that is owed to one. And in some cases, of course, that the couple may find it difficult to have a child. And it's in those moments, especially with couples that maybe one of them or both are infertile, or they have difficulty having children, that they realize in that moment that a child is a gift. That God does not have to give me a child. That, but and that a child I get is a gift from God. Uh, and so, what are they called to do? To do unorthodox fertility treatment? No, that we'll see a bit more in detail in the next slide. But that, of course, having tried all that is listed to do in order to have a child, they should not engage in illicit means to have children, because but to see perhaps that infertility as a cross that our Lord has called them to bear, and also to see it, as the catechism will remind us, as a means of of a kind of, say, spiritual paternity and spiritual maternity, that God wants them to open their hearts and be parents, maybe not of physical children, not of biological children, but parents of maybe their of other people. The Father Opus Dei, many times, and some people used to meet him and say, well, they didn't have children. We say, well, that in a sense, and echoing the catechism, that maybe God has wanted you, the time you would have used to raise the family of your own children, to spend that time serving others, uh, raising other children, maybe volunteer work, or maybe adopting children if they want. There are also cases where people want to have a large family and then they have some biological children and they also adopt some. So, what the important thing there regarding fertility, summary, that is a cross, and that God perhaps in His infinite wisdom wants the couple to live a different type of paternity that is not physical or biological now, but maybe spiritual with many other people. Chastity in apostolic celibacy, also in that what can we say about that? Now, first of all, that if one understands marriage, it's easier to understand celibacy. If one values marriage, then that the fact that a person gives up marriage uh, and gives up marriage so that the person can love God directly, is not giving up something that is bad. Because if marriage was bad, then celibacy would have very little value. Because marriage is good, but that God is better, that the person aspires, and only God who can feel the aspiration of the human heart. The person aspires for God, and with that undivided heart, maybe somehow akin to the parents who don't have children. With that undivided heart, the person imitates our Lord Jesus Christ and the Blessed Virgin Mary. And the person is also a sign uh, of how we'll be in heaven, and where they will be marrying or having children in heaven. The sign of how we'll be in heaven. And the person also shows that that to love to the person's life, that apostolic celibacy, that person gives one's heart fully to God by serving the others. But the person also shows precisely that there are many ways to serve and to love, and that do not necessarily imply that loving is a gift of oneself. And there are many ways to serve and to love that do not imply carrying out a sexual act. It's important to remember that. Once I remember in a class, somebody asked me, we were talking about this topic, said, well, but how is it possible that people who are celibate, and how do they handle their sexual, or how would they show love if they don't have sex? And I said, well, I mean that 90% of the times we show love and the people that we love, we don't have sex with them. Uh, Ordinarily, a person does not have sex with one's mother, but you love your mother. So how do you express love to your mother? Through service. A mother loves her children, but she doesn't have sex with them. How does she express her love for them? Through service and through that gift of oneself. And so, for that reason, that the apostolic celibacy exists for that to serve the others, and for that reason, you could add that is incompatible with immaturity. That the person is immature um, should reconsider, but rather that this is for people who are mature. And because we know one other aspect of that apostolic celibacy, not just for monks and nuns, but the priests in the Latin Church also called to lead that celibacy, priestly celibacy, so that their lives be that a gift. They give themselves not to one person, but to everyone, all the people that God has entrusted to them. Okay, sorry, I repeated the slide. So now we'll now look at the sins that go against the sixth commandment: shall not commit impure acts. First off, um, because at these things, the chastity refers to internal as well as external acts. And lust will be the first thing that will come to our mind. That disorder desire for or inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure when one lusts for something or someone. Well, also any action, conversation, or look contrary to chastity within or outside marriage is a sin against the sixth commandment. And then sins against chastity, and it's important to know this, are always grave because they have to do with the capacity to love. There's no, they are not light sins against chastity because they touch something that's intimate to us, our capacity to love. But they can be venial if there is no full consent or awareness. They can be venial sins, not because they are not grave matter. They're always grave matter, but because for mortals you need grave matter, full knowledge, full consent. So what can make it not to be mortal sin is if there is no full consent or full knowledge or awareness. But the things that have to do with the sixth commandment usually are grave matter. So you may ask now, what consequences do they have? That when one gives into unchastity, it blinds the mind, weakens one's will. The person is passive, unwilling to work, unwilling to serve, and there's a certain attachment to earthly goods or pleasures. It makes one forget the eternal one. And then maybe it gets to a point where the person even begins to question or hate God, say, well, and looks at God as if, well, why are you restricting me? Now, what are the sins against chastity? Uh, First off, there's a long list, but we'll try to go through it very quickly. Well, masturbation, which is deliberate stimulation of one's sexual organs in order to obtain pleasure. So, remember what we started with, that the pleasure is not the main thing. The pleasure is a gift that God has given. So, when one obtains everything just to obtain pleasure, and not even an expression of love, it perverts what sexual act, the conjugal act is. Fornication, which is that carnal union between unmarried man and an unmarried woman. Homosexuality, uh, the relations between persons of the same sex. Masturbation, just a brief analysis, which one cannot apply to all the other sins that we see. Not an act of self-giving. Remember, we spoke about uh, the elements of the sexual act. It has to be an act of self-giving. And masturbation is not. Even though there's no violence, but it's not an act of self-giving. Neither is it an expression of the total giving, total donation of oneself. I'm not fully giving myself to anybody. I'm not gifting myself when I masturbate to anyone. And neither is it open to life. So that's all the say the conditions you put for the sexual act, that it be a gift, that it be um, a donation of oneself or open to life. It does not fulfill any of them. I put this analysis so that using those three criteria, all the other things we see, one can decide to analyze them on one. So now we'll just go quickly to the sins themselves. The sin of lust we've already mentioned. Seduction, which is to seduce one or to entice one to carry out a sexual act. Because outside, fair now, outside the marriage, we sin. Rape, which is to take someone by violence in order to carry out a sexual act. Prostitution, incest, a sexual relationship between two people who are related. Sodomy, which is not close to life. Cohabitation, in which two people live together, they live together, but um, and maybe live as if they are husband and wife, but they have not made any commitment to each other. So it goes also against marriage because, and in that, as I said earlier on, the sexual relationship between them is a lie, and that each time is a lie because with their bodies, they are saying what they've not said with their mouth. And the same way too, maybe by extension, but even though it may seem a bit more justified, trial marriage, the so-called trial marriage that happens in some societies that people say, well, let's start living together and maybe we'll see if you are good enough for me to now decide to marry. The problem with trial marriage is that the person is not giving each individual is not giving oneself completely to the other, but rather treating the other person as a commodity to say, well, let me see whether this like I get a laptop from Jumia or a new phone from Jumia. Let me see if this thing works. And if it doesn't work, I will send the warranty back. So behind all that thinking is uh, not me giving myself, is that this is an object to or a gadget that I will use and see whether it's useful to me or not. And if it's not useful, I will send it back. Let's not confuse this with courtship. I mean, in courtship, people get to know each other, to understand each other. But in the so-called trial marriage, they live as if they are married. They take all the conjugal rights, but without any sense of permanence, without that sense of gift of self, or rather to try. And then if And so I'm not giving myself. I'm trying out a product, and if the product is not good, I'll return the product. So there's no thought about giving myself. Then there's adultery, because in the adultery, it's clearer that one lies, by using telling somebody else with one's body, I give myself to you when I'm already giving myself to somebody else. Polygamy, in which the union, of course, is not exclusive one on one. Is I gave a man is, for example, a man is married to three women. So I give one third of myself to you, one third of myself to the second, and one third of myself to the third. So it's not a complete giving of oneself. And it also demeans the woman if there are several women. That so she's not worthy to get her husband fully, just a third of him. So she's worth one third of him, for example. Just have that idea. Then there's divorce. Divorce which shows the impermanence of the gift, that the gift is not forever but for some time. Then contraception, as we've seen earlier on in the class. And in vitro fertilization, IVF, I put it here, even though it also is covered in the fifth commandment, but it's another mention here, that we already said that the child is not a gift, it's not a right of the parent. It's important to remember that. But not only that the child no longer becomes the fruit of love, but in IVF, but also the fruit of say of science. Just like maybe you have if I bring a car now, the car is not made by one person, made by a whole team. So the child drive here is made by the father, the mother, I don't know, a surrogate person, a lab technician, three doctors. So all of them come and say we put you together as if the person. So it means the child. One. Two, in IVF, that's why it has to do with the fifth commandment. There's no IVF that is carried out without destruction of embryos and treating human beings, because they are human beings and like products. And of course, the destruction of embryos is to commit murder, which goes against the fifth commandment. And so, for these reasons, what IVF was morally wrong. Then, of course, attached to IVF is also, I put that here, it's also surrogacy. Because that surrogacy, again, when the person gets a third party to have a child for have a child for the couple. So what does that mean? It means that, well, I don't give myself fully to you. I give I don't give my whole masculinity to vice versa. We need to call a third party to settle things. So it goes against, of course, that union and that total gift of self. It was all one's masculinity and all one's femininity. Having said all this, maybe to conclude, so that this class is not excessively long, it's good to ask, well, what are the means of practicing and growing in virtue of Holy Spirit? Because behind all this, you should have in mind, well, to live charity. Uh, First of all, through prayer, to ask our Lord, to ask God through prayer for that virtue of just of holy purity. Secondly, intense work, moderation in food and drink. So if one is temperate in food and drink, it's easier to regulate one's sexual appetite. Guarding of one's eyes. But we take care of what we watch, or what we see. That is easier to control one's appetite. Avoiding conversations about impure things. Avoiding the reading of questionable books. Not attending immoral shows. Having the courage to be cowards, to know how to flee from situations that maybe may compromise my purity or my relationship with the others. Being very sincere in spiritual direction, because at times uh, the difficulty is actually saying the things that we've done. And that before there's no shame. Many times after a fall, there's a lot of shame, and at times that shame leads to insincerity. Forgetting about oneself, and that is to serve the others. And this is critical, because when one learns to think not of himself but of the others he's serving. It's easier for the person to understand what it means to give oneself, yeah, to the other. And then um, having a great devotion to Mary Most Holy, going to the Blessed Virgin Mary a lot, as many people do. At times saying the three Hail Marys at night, asking her for that virtue of purity. With that, we end the class. So I hope it's useful to you. Thank you very much, and God bless.